Morning, everybody. Pleased to be here. I talk funny. Still reminded of that sometime, but I've come a long way. I was in a field day I don't know if it was last year or the year before, and I hadn't been in that area for a while, and afterwards one of the farmers came to me and said, "Well, you sure came a long way. This time I could understand what you were saying. When you first came here, I had no idea." I said, "Okay." I didn't know my English was that bad when I first arrived, but apparently it was. But now I perhaps have picked up some Pennsylvania slang, so that helps always a lot. Well, I was given this title by, I guess, Randall Reeder. And when I looked at it again recently, I thought, whoa, that's challenging. I mean, I think he'll ask me for my opinion. So I'll do my best to talk about this. Are we moving in the right direction? And I know not everybody has the same opinion, and that's fine. I'm a very strong, continuous no-till kind of promoter. We have seen a lot of changes over the years in Pennsylvania agriculture. No-till has become the major way of planting. It was about 20% in 2000 when I started, and now we are at somewhere like 65% no-till in the state. So it has been great. It's been wonderful, really, to do that work. We have one big factor has been a farmer group called the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. It was formed in 2005. It's a farmer-directed organization. And I believe those kinds of organizations are very, very, very important to move the needle on anything. We can talk till we are blue in the face, but we don't nearly have the impact that they have. When they share what they do on their own farm, it's priceless. And I really have enjoyed over the years working with them. It's a partnership, you know. We had many discussions, like some of them, they were going towards vertical tillage for a while, and we talked about that, and I guess they felt that it was better to move away from that, and now they're very much devoted to no-till and doing so many innovative things with continuous no-tillage that makes it really interesting, and it's a lot of fun. I was at the previous presentation, and the speaker spoke about having fun, and it's definitely important for us to enjoy what we are doing. If we are just doing it to make some money and it's just a drag, it's not worth it. We should really do something else. I always tell my kids that too. I say, don't chase money. Do something that, actually I tell them, do something God has called you to do, and then everything else will be taken care of. Well, before I go into perhaps I think I might end up with trying to have a discussion with you guys about, are we moving in the right direction here? But I first wanted to review a little bit the value of no-tillage and the different, just the research that shows why we are even thinking that way. And it's really going back to basics. So first of all, erosion control. So erosion control is very much impacted by the types of tillage. And you see here, this is one of like, oh man, there's so many studies like this. And it's just showing you the same thing over and over and over again. With moldboard plowing, we have so much higher soil erosion than even with chisel plowing. But with no-till, we are really knocking that erosion down to very minimal levels. And you see, I have here this black line is the residue cover, and that is really important. If we talk no-till, but we don't have residue cover, we don't have anything like valuable, in my perspective. It's really important to have residue cover. And that is why in this chisel plowing they had so much reduced soil erosion, because there was still a lot of residue left. But many times we don't have that much residue, and that is a challenge with chisel plowing, that that residue cover is so reduced. I think personally that we are still not very serious about soil erosion. I came to the United States really to learn about soil erosion, and because this is like the heart where all the research on soil erosion started, and also where it was implemented. A system was designed to help farmers design their farming systems so that they wouldn't have a lot of erosion. But I think that the tolerable soil loss erosion rate is set way too high. That was done in like a dark, smoky room in the 60s, is my understanding. That was before I was born. I wasn't involved. And people were just sitting around the table and saying, well, what would be a tolerable soil loss level? And they just came up with these levels. And I think, you know, if you think about what was going on, what technologies did they have in those days, and what do we have today? In those days, they didn't have no tillage, really. So they were probably just coming up with these numbers as somewhat of a practical, from a practical point of view, what was doable with the technologies that they had in those days. But in my work in Pennsylvania, I'm always intrigued, because I first always thought the tolerable soil loss level was established to that the soil formation would be the same as the tolerable soil loss level. That is what I thought first. But then it started to find some weird things. For example, we have soils in the same field from the same parent material. For example, a limestone soils in our limestone valley, and you have a deep soil called, that series is called Hagerstown silt loam, is most productive soils in Pennsylvania are from a deep limestone soil. It has a tolerable soil loss level of 5 tons per acre per year. But then in the same fields, you have shallower outcroppings where the soil is shallow. But it is all from the same parent material in the same field under the same conditions. The soil formation should be very much the same. However, the tolerable soil loss level is only 1 ton per acre per year. Why? Because the formation of the soil is not nearly 5 tons per acre per year. Because we can just get away with it because we have a deep soil. But in reality, if we think long term, over perhaps a century, really we are not being sustainable. I reviewed some information about soil formation, and I think the rates are somewhere like not even half a ton per acre per year. When you see the pedologists' literature, it varies depending on conditions and parent material, but it's not typically higher. I don't think it is 1. So here we are, and we're still designing our conservation based on very high tolerable soil loss levels. However, with no-tillage now, with no-till systems, we can do much better. So I'm really hoping that we will somehow reconsider. Here another graph to show the relationship between the soil cover and soil loss. So if we have a bare soil, here it would be 100%. And then when you add crop residue, this is the kind of the relationship that has been shown over the years this is with rainfall simulation studies. But you see it declines rapidly here. It's not a straight line. It's first going fast and then it kind of flattens out. So that is here, with 30% soil cover, we reduce our soil erosion about 70%. And this is the reason why we use 30% residue cover as the definition for conservation tillage. We need to have at least 30% residue cover to be able to call that conservation tillage. So that first 30% is very important for soil erosion control. Not to say that the remainder is not important, but that first 30 is really reduces soil erosion a lot. Now, here we see some of the things that can happen when you have no residue cover. Here, runoff, erosion, soybeans getting flooded there. Or this. This is one of the few. You typically don't see sheet erosion that nice, but here we have real sheet erosion. It comes down the field like a sheet. And this soil was pulverized completely and packed for alfalfa establishment. You can see the alfalfa seedlings coming up, but I think this erosion might do some damage to the stand too. Because this seals up with the impact of the raindrops, and then we get runoff. Well, there is still space in the soil for water underneath to go. There's pore space, but the soil surface has sealed up. Now, another aspect of no-till is improvement in infiltration. And here the relationship is a little bit different than with soil erosion. So this comes from Brazil. This is some of the basic research that was so influential in the no-till movement in Brazil and in South America. They have very intense rainfall, so they are very aware of the importance of this, getting the water in the ground. So you see here, if we go from 0 to 30% residue cover, we are improving infiltration a little bit, but not so very much. It's really when the line is kind of the opposite of for soil erosion. And therefore, if we really want to improve infiltration, we need to maximize residue cover. So for erosion, perhaps we can do with 30% residue cover, but for really maximizing infiltration, we want to have more than that. And that is the new types of systems that we try to develop in no-tillage, is to get to the high residue covers. By the way, you see here there are 3 types of tillage, and the lines are the same. How can that be, you will ask? Why is no-till no difference from these other types of tillage? Well, they put the straw on the soil after the tillage. Of course, in reality, in real farm country, we don't put straw on the soil typically after tillage. So what this was really showing was that the residue cover was doing the job. It was not so much the tillage, but it was the cover that protects the soil surface that caused that infiltration rate to increase so much. Here's another study. This is from the southeastern United States, I think. This is actually from Randall's book. But again, showing you the importance of residue cover, because if you have bare no-tillage, you can have actually lower infiltration than with plowed conditions. You need to really, and then if you have more than 40%, you see you have 80% residue cover, you have the highest infiltration. So that's why we want to maximize residue cover to improve infiltration. This is from Coshocton here, a research station. Not sure, is it still open or it's kind of closed? I think Ohio State's kind of inherited it. I was very disappointed when they closed that, because I went there as a grad student to visit, and it was just mind-boggling. I so appreciated. That was all built during the Great Depression. And it's just amazing that they had lysimeters there. The biggest lysimeters, I think, in the world were built there by pure manpower, just by people just making those things. It was amazing. But they also had some watersheds, and they have no-till watershed and a conventional till watershed, and they collected the runoff every year. This was actually in continuous corn, and so you had very good residue cover. Well, when you talk about 0.2 inches of runoff per year, out of 40, roughly, what we get per year, precip, that's nothing. That's basically 0. When I express it as percent of the precipitation, it's 0. Conventional tillage, and this watershed, interestingly, was a little bit steeper than that one. But on conventional tillage, you have so much more runoff. On average, it was 7 inches, which represented 16% of the annual precipitation. So I think this is very important information for us to maximize residue cover. In my research, this was a trial that we did in southeastern Pennsylvania. It was continuous corn, and I just show you this because I found it always hard to maintain high residue cover when we started to disturb it a little bit. This is no-till. This is chisel disking. We don't nearly have 30% residue cover. In those days, when I first started doing that, I would meet farmers and I would ask them, are you plowing? They said, no, I'm not plowing. Then I found out they were chisel plowing, but they didn't call that plowing. So here, chisel disking is not giving us enough residue cover even for erosion control. Now we also tried zone tillage with the 3-coulter system, and even there, the residue cover was much reduced, and this is in continuous corn. Of course, moldboard plowing, we didn't even, I think we had 5%, that's 5% residue cover. But I started to think, well, this is continuous corn. What about corn soybeans? If we use this, even zone tillage or something like that, we are many times in the crop rotation, we will not have enough residue cover there. Another thing is about tillage in the rotation. It loosens the soil, and we don't have carryover of crop residue. And we can get these kinds of situations where here there's still crop residue at the soil surface, but because there was tillage in the past, we see a lot of erosion. Some people don't like organic matter stratification, but Alan Franzlubers, he really made the case that organic matter stratification is a good thing. And he actually developed an indicator and to evaluate systems based on that organic matter stratification. And the systems that have more organic matter near the soil surface rate higher in his indicator than those that have more organic matter down in the profile. I ran into that sometimes with the whole carbon sequestration discussions. You know, in carbon sequestration, it doesn't matter where the carbon is. It's actually, if it's down in the soil, it's good. But when we think about the functionality of our soil, it's much more valuable to have the organic matter near the soil surface. Here, he has the points that he makes. If the organic matter is near the soil surface, we have improved water use efficiency because that helps improve aggregation and it protects the soil surface. So we get less runoff, and also we have more water retention. Nutrient cycling is improved by slowing the mineralization. If we mix that crop residue all with the soil, mineralization is much faster. The erosion and compaction are reduced. Your no-till soil becomes more resistant to compaction. The biological activity is improved. When we incorporate the residue in the soil, for example, night crawlers, they don't thrive on that. They need that crop residue near the soil surface. So, again, stratification helps. And that enhances the long-term productivity of the soil. Here, just showing you the effect of tillage systems. Long-term no-till versus short-term no-tillage. That was, I think, 5 years old, and the aggregate stability. So with that stratification of that organic matter near the soil surface, we are getting much better soil aggregation and soil tilth. That has many benefits. Our farmers have really banked on this. Started to appreciate that. I did a lot of work with Amish farmers in Pennsylvania and helping them adopt continuous no-tillage. They had no-till planters, but they didn't have drills early on. And so I met a couple of them, and then each year they had to, each time they had to establish hay, they had to moldboard plow. The Amish don't use chisel plow, so they had to moldboard plow and establish their hay with moldboard. And then I was saying to them, but now you have just done 8 years of no-tillage, and you're plowing everything up. You're losing all the benefits. And they really got it. And they said, oh, we need to buy a drill. But their planters, they had got them from the Midwest on tractor trailers, 4-row planters, and then they would refurbish them and make them so they would be like no-till, new no-till planters, like John Deere 7000 was very popular. But for small drills, there were none. They had to have like I think either 5 or 7 foot drill, and they were not second hand available. So they had to go and look for a new drill, and it was very expensive. And of course, those Amish, they only have perhaps less than 10 acres of hay per year to establish. So to buy a $25,000 drill is a lot of money for them. However, of course, it also helps to establish cover crops, which they had trouble with that also. They didn't use cover crops because they didn't have no-till drills. Well, it was so interesting to see that they got a Great Plains drill, small one, and the first year they had it, they put 700 acres on that drill. And I said, wow, what's going on here? And they said, yeah, all our neighbors wanted also to use them, so we just rent it out. Well, that was a great lesson to me. And one of the things they said they really benefited from was they had much better establishment of the alfalfa on the clay knobs after years of no-tillage, and that was because the soil tilth in the surface soil was so much improved, and it helped with germination. Yeah, so long-term was like, I think that when we did this, it was like 25 years of no-tillage, and the short-term no-till was like 5 years. We converted some of the tillage in this trial to no-till. Earthworms, all right, here, again, this is like a classic study, 1982, done in England by Edwards, who, is he still at Ohio State? I don't know, Clive Edwards? He retired probably. I don't know, he must be old now. But anyway, I'm getting old too. Here, this is so interesting also, the effect of no-till on these deep burrowing earthworms versus the shallow working species. So you see it really affects those deep burrowing earthworms, like a night crawler is our species. They live in the long vertical burrows that go up and down, and they need that crop residue near the soil, on the soil surface. These shallow working species, they live more in the topsoil, they move horizontally, and they can live more on organic matter that is in the soil. So they don't need to necessarily have it all at the surface, although they are still disturbed by all this tillage. They don't thrive as much, but you see they are less affected. But these night crawlers are really very important for our functionality of our no-till system. And this again, it takes time to build these populations up. And each time you till, you disturb them again. And if you have times during the rotation when you have no residue cover, those night crawlers are really going to suffer. Microbial biomass, that is an indicator of all kind of everything together, the fungi, bacteria, everything together. And this was a summary published some years ago. And from many different studies, they showed that if it is 1, it means the microbial biomass in no-tillage was the same as in conventional tillage in trials. If it is above 1, it means no-till has more microbial biomass carbon than conventional tillage. Well, you see, short-term no-till has it a little bit higher, but the longer you do no-till, the more you improve that difference. And especially these are fungi. Here another study, this is from Michigan. You just see how long, the longer you do no-till, the more microbial biomass you have. And this is another classic study on fungi. Here we see the fungal proportion of the biomass composed of fungi. No-till versus conventional tillage, and in different states this was done. More fungal in the surface horizon of the soil. So soil profile modification is what we are getting with long-term no-tillage. This is a study from the Netherlands where they contrasted the soil profile in pasture land versus moldboard plowed cropland versus moldboard plowed cropland that was subsoiled with a so-called rota digger. I don't know exactly, it seems some kind of a rotavator. And they broke up the plow pan that they had created. Well, the soil structure was so dramatically different. Here there's a stable soil structure in the surface that gradually transitions to the subsoil, but then all these macropores in the subsoil to 80 centimeter deep. Okay, and even below that probably. So these deep burrowing earthworms are so much more numerous here. And then we have this stable soil structure where we have macroporosity. There's a range of pore spaces there. In this arable land, cropland, well, the surface soil structure is very weak. There's a plow pan, and lo and behold, below the plow pan, no night crawler burrows. You start to really change the whole soil profile. Here, interestingly, the subsoiled treatment, it just busted up that plow pan, but it didn't really improve the soil structure, of course, because tillage doesn't improve soil structure, and they didn't do anything else different. So when later, they just went back to their moldboard days, and then this compacted to a greater density, and that tillage pan was reformed, and it was more dense than over there, because they just rearranged it so it could be compacted more easily. But in here, I show you this picture because here we see how the whole soil profile with these root systems and also these deep-rooted crops like alfalfa, we can also create these pore spaces in the subsoil as well. And then your soil, so I put that pasture picture in there because with no-tillage, long-term no-tillage, we're really trying to emulate somewhat that pasture situation. Probably we're not going to get there entirely, but with being more diligent in trying to have living crops in the field all the time, and then having root systems, varying root systems, and using crop diversity, we can make a long way there. So here, this is from that same study from the Netherlands, where they looked at that soil profile. They also found that the soil became more trafficable because it was better drained in that pasture situation where we have the good structure. And so, for example, here in January, they had more than 20 days that the soil was fit to be on it. But in this moldboard plowed cropland, the soil was sitting so wet so many days that you couldn't really get in the field. And I think this is another benefit of long-term no-tillage that is very important. I had that in my tillage study, one of a compaction study in long-term no-till. It really drove home the fact that here we are trying to compact the no-till soil at the worst time of the year with the worst type of equipment, a 30-ton triaxle with road tires inflated to 100 psi. And these were the tracks we were making long-term no-till. This is 2-year-old no-tillage. We subsoiled this 2 years ago. The ruts are deeper. The soil is less forgiving. And here, 1-year-old, now we're really making big ruts. And here, this was subsoiled this spring. We got stuck. And shows you the difference in susceptibility to compaction. All right. That was a bit of the basics on long-term no-tillage. Now I looked up a little bit about the statistics. No-till is a share of our, how much no-tillage do we have in our state? So here I said 67% or 65% in Pennsylvania. In Ohio, it's also high, 47%. Pretty high already. That is higher than in many other states. So I'm happy to see that. However, it has been kind of stagnant. And even in Pennsylvania right now, I don't think we're adding many more no-till acres at the moment. In Ohio, actually, it went backwards a little bit between 2012 and 2017. So no-till is kind of staying still. Interestingly, there is a big growth in reduced tillage. Now it's 34%, and it has been growing. This was grew 7.7% in Ohio. And that is because farmers are transitioning from moldboard plowing, I guess, into some form of reduced tillage. This is the intensive tillage, 19%, and that has been decreasing. So you see, there is an increase in reduced tillage. At least this is from 2017. I assume it's still pretty accurate and current. Now, the interesting thing I found when I started dig a little deeper, here we see in this area here, this is the, now with Lake Erie, what's all going on, there's a lot of interest in what's going on in this watershed, alright, with water quality problems. So here you see, looking pretty good, like right there, chugging along, 40 or 50% no-till. However, now we're starting to look at the crops, and this was really interesting to me. Let's look at 2010. So this is out of the total percent no-tillage. Only like 10% of that is corn. Most no-till is soybeans, and there's a little bit of wheat in here. So the reality is that most corn is not no-tilled. What does that mean for us in terms of continuous no-tillage? It's not really happening. This is actually from that study. They said no-till is the system of choice for soybeans. 65% of the soybeans are growing with no-till practices. But no-till is seldom practiced on corn, with only 19% of the planted corn acres grown using the no-till system. So they're saying that really no-till, continuous no-till is almost non-existent in this area. Am I telling you guys anything new? Perhaps not. Perhaps you're just sitting here, oh, it's old hat. I don't know. I kind of had the gut feeling that was like this, but here we have the data to show it. So continuous no-tillage is really not very common. So I wanted to talk a little bit about phosphorus stratification, because I don't know if it's still happening, but no-till got a bad name. Is that correct? No-till got a bad name for causing problems, water quality problems in Lake Erie? Yes? Okay. I always had so people were saying, we need to really do a little tillage in there to mix that phosphorus and to reduce this stratification, because this is really causing the problems in Lake Erie water quality. That was the message I was hearing. Perhaps my ears are not good. I don't know. Did you guys hear that? Yes. Is it still happening? Still people are saying that? So, this is the reason they say this, that over time in no-tillage we can have a concentration of phosphorus there in that surface that is definitely higher. This is continuous no-tillage. This is one study that was done years ago in somewhere in the West. They did it with wheat, and they converted the fields to no-till, and here the total phosphorus loss dropped like precipitously. It just dropped like a stone. Compared to conventional wheat. But this is total. This is concentration of phosphorus in the runoff. That's total. So total phosphorus, we're all kind of on the same page with that. That is reduced. But most of that phosphorus is lost in sediment. It's attached to sediment. And there is a tiny bit of soluble phosphorus also that's getting lost. That is, much of what this is actually soluble phosphorus, and it's not attached to sediment. And that is much more reactive. That's true. Now, I want to point out this is concentration. It's not total loss. So this is the concentration in the runoff that they collected. But with no tillage, we have less runoff. So that's another thing that I often don't see really talked about that much. But this is the soluble and algal available phosphorus, and that was in that study in wheat. And you see this is no tillage. It's higher, okay, than in conventional till. So it's very low, but it's higher. Now this is the concentration again. So this has caused people to say, well, this is a problem, stratification, so we need to do something to mix it in. And this is the reason for the poor water quality in Lake Erie. But to me it doesn't make any sense, because you don't hardly have any continuous no-tillage here. So how can that ever, then, doing some more tillage in there, it won't have, I don't think it will improve the situation. So there was an interesting article in No-Till Farmer, where they interviewed a gentleman called Davis. I don't know who he is, but he said that he didn't think no-till was a likely cause for the increased phosphorus losses to Lake Erie. That methods and timing of fertilizer application, more broadcast surface applications versus rover fertilizer, application of fertilizer in the winter months or on frozen ground, increased soil compaction, and the trend towards applying 2 years' worth of fertilizer on the corn crop were probably much more likely to be the causes of that eutrophication and losses of phosphorus from the farmlands. I think continuous no-tillage is not a contributor to that water quality problem. Now I want to say, so you have very little corn that is no-tilled. So why is that? When do I need to stop, Harold? 11:45. Oh, okay. So, when we have a lot of crop residue, that definitely changes the warming of the soil. There's the bright residue. That's just physics. We have this solar radiation, shines on the residue. It gets some of it. We have more reflection. Dark soil absorbs more of the radiation and it warms up. Then another thing is we have higher water content in the surface soil. The residue conserves moisture. So water has a higher heat capacity, and also the thermal conductivity of water is higher, so the heat is now transmitted to the subsoil, and it has to warm a bigger volume, so the surface of the soil warms up more slowly, and that really can cause some temperature differences. Here we see no tillage. It's a little bit cooler than these other tillage types, and we did some work trying to, and you see strip tillage or zone tillage are ways to address that. And this is during the day, how the dynamic is, the soil temperature. During the day, when the sun is out, is when that difference shows up the most. Here in the early morning, it's non-existent. Actually, sometimes, no-till can be warmer than conventional tillage, but this difference here is really what causes then that soil to warm up a little bit slower. So it takes a little bit longer for the crop to get going. At least corn. Why is corn more affected than soybeans? Well, the growth point of corn is below the soil surface for like 6 weeks after planting. So, just makes sense. Growth is governed by soil temperature for a longer period of time. Soybeans, the growth point is above the ground as soon as it's up. So there are some other reasons why no-till corn it's a little bit more tough, but our farmers are having now very much success with it. This was some of the early work on corn, no-till corn, and they measured. This was in Indiana. This was in southern Indiana and northern Indiana. And that early warming didn't really mean that this was 8 weeks after planting, the corn crop was the same in the southern part of the state. This was in like the 1970s, I think this was done, 1980s, around that time. In the northern part of Indiana, they saw that that cooler soil was actually showing up 8 weeks after planting in a smaller corn there in no-till. But there are some ways to address this. For example, they were doing a lot of work with ridge tillage on those days. I think you can use strip tillage perhaps, or zone tillage, something like that, to alleviate that. But, you know, another thing that we have to think about, this was a few decades ago, and we definitely have experienced a warming. Things are perhaps where we were now in southern Indiana, it's now northern Indiana. They say we in Pennsylvania, in a couple of decades, we will be like Tennessee. So I think this is not getting worse. For no tillage, we can expect this to become less of a problem. So actually, I did some work on this, and I tried to use. I thought, well, if it's really a problem, and our no-till corn yields are reduced, we have to do something about it. Can we just use zone tillage or strip tillage? This was in the southern part of Pennsylvania. Well, we didn't see any benefit to it. So we have gone a total no-till route. Now this is in the south, but also I have another study in the central part of the state, and we also didn't see benefit of doing on those kind of tillage systems. So we have really gone the no-till route. Although here I did do a study for a few years with on a very poorly drained soil. You know, in Pennsylvania we are blessed because most of our soils are well drained, the ones that we use for crop production intensively. We have poorly drained soils in the western part and the northern part of the state, but most of our agriculture is in the southern part of the state, southeast. So I was also interested in looking at some other soil types. These are soils that are on the hill slopes, very interesting. They have a fragipan. And that fragipan is very impervious to water. So you see here in the spring, that's the water table. So here, 2 feet below soil surface. We did this was in continuous corn. This was long-term no-till, but we did some strip tillage, and we did actually find that in this circumstance, there was a yield improvement with strip tillage. So we still were able to maintain most of the crop residue cover and benefits of no-till even with the strip tillage. This is the soil, how that looks. Now in the summer, that water will disappear, and actually now the roots are also limited by that fragipan. So we have a shallow kind of soil now with the root system being relatively small. This was the penetration resistance, and even a year later, the penetration resistance was still measurably lower in the subsoiled area. But the fragipan was actually lower than this. So we didn't really disturb the fragipan, but it did improve the crop yields. Whether it is necessary to do, we went to 17 inches. Whether we didn't try to do shallower zone tillage, but here was a study from New York, and that was also on a fragipan soil, and they did see that it was not really necessary to go that deep, so 7 inches might be enough. It's just an alternative. I'm not saying we cannot do things like this if we have to, if it helps our crop productivity, but let's keep most of the benefits of no tillage as much as possible. This is the zone till machine that we used with a 3-coulter system. It's really, I don't see them anymore. I don't know, in Pennsylvania, our farmers don't seem to use them anymore. That is what that would look like. So here, this is not in Pennsylvania. We don't have soils like this. Probably from Ohio. I don't know. I see soils like this here. Very dark. This was our experiment. We used a zone till cart, actually. We did a study on working farms, and these were the yields, no-till, zone till. And I had expected this to be really beneficial in the northern parts of the state, where we have more of a challenge with the short growing season and colder soils. And there's a dramatic difference between the growing season here and here in Pennsylvania. Very big difference. But we didn't actually find many times that zone tillage improved the crop yields. So our farmers have kind of moved away from it. So I think that perhaps that soil temperature problem is being sometimes a little bit overblown. What I'm more encouraged about is crop rotation. So this is from Ohio here, from Hoytville, old research, but they showed continuous corn, no-till was in those days, had a reduced yield. But with just rotating it with soybean, the yields in corn were not reduced anymore. Or you can also rotate it with something like increasing meadow. So I think instead of focusing on tillage, we should, there is really a need for us to do more, put more emphasis on greater crop diversity and use of cover crops. I was really, again, a little bit disappointed when I drove up here. Now, I know you guys had a very challenging year last year, with all the delayed and some of the areas not being planted, but I didn't hardly see any cover crops. When I am in Pennsylvania, we see cover crops everywhere. Our farmers have really started to use them a lot. I think this is still where we have a lot of need. You know, I put this map up here. This is our wind and water erosion. And this is, still, there is a lot of soil erosion happening here. This is from an old trial where they monitored the organic matter content since, the soil was plowed out of the sod, the prairie. This is from, I think these are the Morrow plots in Illinois. Well, this is the organic matter content, or the carbon. It has gone down, and now we're at 53% of where we were when we first started farming. In this very heartland of America, Midwest. Our practices have led to this, but can we improve that and move it back up, move the needle back up? So, now it comes you guys now need to have some participation. So, which direction do we have to go? I think a challenge for us here in this area, and I say us because I feel very much like a Buckeye. I'm a Buckeye, so I feel passionate about this, what's going on here. How can we make the continuous no-tillage a reality in this area? So we have to address this corn. What's going on with this corn? Why can't we do no-till corn and with rotation with soybeans? You know, you guys are growing even, I found out, I didn't realize that 2 years of soybeans, 1 year of corn seems to be more normal here than corn soybeans, correct? No? Depends on where you're at, I guess. You know, in that slide that I showed you earlier, we go back to that. This one. Here. This shows you, so you need to put these things on top of each other. That is the total percentage of no-tillage. So 10.5 corn plus 40, so that's 50% no-till plus 8% in wheat. So we come up with the, like, whatever it is, 58% no-till. But you see this bar soybeans is much higher. That's the total acreage of soybeans. So we have a lot more soybeans than corn. And so there are some farmers around that grow more than only 1 year of corn and 1 year of soybeans. They grow more, like they do 2 years of soybeans and then 1 year of corn. So I don't think that whole thing about the soil temperature should be a big problem. In soybeans, it's been shown to be not an issue. Another challenge, how can we increase the use of cover crops in northwestern Ohio? Why is it not happening? And I'm going to ask you guys after I'm going through this list to give me some, hopefully I can learn something. Why can we increase greater crop diversity? Cover crop diversity, but also crop diversity. Are there crop alternatives? I'm really so interested in this. We heard the previous speaker, he was saying about what they're doing in North Dakota. they are looking for alternative crops. Can we find alternative crops? Perhaps this is a golden opportunity now. Corn and soybeans, the profitability is perhaps not as great as it once was. Can we think about other crops that can be adding to the diversity, and we can do other things with cover crops and crops rotations? Then two other questions I have. Can greater livestock integration be accomplished? This is one of my current areas of research. I'm doing work on grazing cover crops, and we are doing a study in south central Pennsylvania with 4 farmers that we're looking at grazing cover crops that planted after corn silage, and we're looking at the impact on the soil, but also now this can become the cover crops become more profitable. You can get some money out of those cover crops by grazing them. And then the other thing is contrasting cover crops planted after small grain harvest and then grazing them versus double crop soybeans, which in that southern part of Pennsylvania, a lot of our farmers are double cropping soybeans after small grain harvest. And so they're making some income on that. The yields are sometimes not the best, but we wanted to contrast that with, can we plant a diverse multi-species cover crop and then graze that, and can we get enough income from that grazing that it becomes competitive with the double crop soybeans? That's just one example. There could be many more opportunities. And then my final challenge to you, I was just becoming very philosophical in my office, but actually this is something I'm kind of thinking about a lot. How can we bring people back to the rural areas? This is a bigger question, I think, but it has recently started to become even more pronounced to me. You know, I'm from Europe. I'm from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it's not so bad yet because Netherlands is a tiny country, very densely populated, and the farming is kind of sprinkled throughout the urban areas. But my wife is from Spain. And in Spain, the rural depopulation, it is just mind-boggling. It is incredible. And it is now one of their primary policy concerns for the government, that how they want to address rural depopulation. The village where my wife lived, there's now only a few old people there. Most homes are closed. There's nobody living in them anymore. And this is becoming a very big problem. So in America, I think we're headed the same direction. I was in Illinois years back, and I visited a wonderful farm. The soil was just so dark, so beautiful, and just these enormous fields, just amazing. But then the nearest neighbor was like, I don't know, a mile down the road. And we went to the town, and in the town, everything was so sleepy. There was a restaurant. We were there. It was just a couple people. They all seemed to know each other. And it was also, I think they closed down the elevator. Now the farmer had to drive, 70 miles to deliver his grain. And I started thinking, wow. And then the kids had to go to school, and the school bus had to drive way far. And I was thinking, it's perhaps not very attractive to live here. And I think we need to find ways to make life in the rural areas attractive again, I think. So it's something I'm working on in Pennsylvania. I'm trying to start a grass-fed meat marketing cooperative with some farmers, where we have an area in northwestern Pennsylvania that is very economically depressed. All right. So how can we make continuous no-tillage a reality? What is the problem? Why are not more people doing this? You guys have any ideas? No ideas? It's not easy. To do no-till corn?
It's just that it takes a different thought process.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
I think maybe some of the thought process is there. I've pondered this for a while. I mean, I've had people tell me, there are no-till farmers, they're no-till farmers. Well, they just no-till one crop and then they do tillage for the other.
Right.
They recognize that no-till is desirable. They think they're doing this and getting the full benefit without. It's like smoking. No, it's not. The word means the same thing.
Okay, so
Saturday, are you a non-smoker?
okay, so let me repeat for the audience here. So the comment is made that farmers have the attitude like, I'm a no-tiller because they no-till beans, but they just plow the other years for corn, and yeah, their thinking is like that. So it's like smoking on Saturday only. Yeah. Yes, another idea.
No-till corn's ugly.
No-till corn is ugly.
You go in there, it looks pretty bad, you plant it. I mean, a couple months later it looks fine. When you first put it in, it doesn't look as good as.
Okay. So, is that still a concern for people? Plant or farm ugly? Actually, that was like a slogan for a while, way back. That was a thing that people had to overcome, a mental thing that the field needs to look neat. And it was a big problem that you had all this trash in the field. So they said, okay guys, go farm ugly because it's better. Any other ideas?
Here in Northwest Ohio, the policies that we're being presented with now are actually driving us back to using tillage if we're using manure. They want us to incorporate. They don't want us to no-till.
Okay, so there are policy initiatives that are favoring tillage for incorporation of things like manure. Okay? In some areas?
I live in the 6-county area around Toledo, and maybe 1 out of 60 farmers has any livestock. There's no
And that is where?
up around Toledo.
Up around Toledo, there is not many livestock farms, so that's not a big issue over there, the incorporation of manure. Okay? All right. Well, I would challenge you and say, well, it shouldn't be that hard to do no-till corn after soybeans, to be honest with you. I don't think. I don't quite know why not more farmers are doing it, but perhaps, you know, one thing that I have really appreciated is the importance of that farmer organization that we have. I don't know if you guys have anything like that, but they have really been like a big reason that we have so much no-till and so much continuous no-tills in Pennsylvania. Do you guys have anything like a no-till alliance or something like? Yeah, you do have a no-till council. Yes, it's a little bit different perhaps from our farmer. Our organization is really farmer-run, which it seems yours too. Okay. So, yeah. So I have found those things to be very important. To do some demonstration plots and have farmers involved in them. Not just we do the work on the farm and then you have a field day, but have the farmer be part of that and then help the farmer to test out perhaps some new things. How can we increase? Now this is cover crops. I mean, we first have to get that hurdle of continuous no-till, I think, out of the way. But then, what about cover crops? Why are not more people using cover crops? Timing. After harvest. You can't get in the field. Last 2 years, yeah, but terrible. Yes. I can see that. But,
I actually see more people working with cover crops than going with no-till.
also, so there is more people going to cover crops than going to no-till. Is a comment made here. And why is that? Because I find I find that the combination of no-tillage and cover crops, it works so good because we are saving a lot of time with establishment. We can have the drill in the field when we are harvesting. So I don't know why farmers are doing with cover crops. It's with tillage much more difficult, I find. But that's what's happening. Now you have perhaps the prevent planting. There are some farmers that plant cover crops instead of. Has that happened here? Yeah? Okay. Other comment there?
I think he's talking about a lot of farmers are using vertical tillage and they're running air seed on top of it.
Okay.
It's
Yes.
And then you kind of started vertical tillage, and then you start seeing them start to crank the gangs back. It ends up being a big disc anyways, but I think that's why a lot of the tillage guys are doing cover crops. They can just run it through. It's like, the air seeder line.
Oh.
Just run it.
Okay, so they have a vertical tillage machine, and then they have an air seeder on it. And they establish cover crops like that. Okay. So that is actually one of the few places that I see that vertical tillage have I like that kind of approach, because now the vertical tillage tool becomes like a drill. And I've seen some positive results with that, like I visited Ashore, Maryland. A lot of farmers there seem to be using that system, and they got fairly good establishment. We in our state, some of our farmers use that, but they didn't get very good establishment, and they actually moved back to drilling the cover crop. Yeah. Okay. Any other ideas about cover crops? How we can use more cover crops? Yes?
One of the main problems is the herbicide program used as adverse effect on.
Okay, so herbicides. So the herbicides you guys use are having a detrimental effect on things like small grains?
The residuals.
Residual?
And then the short window when it was applied until time to put the cover crop on.
Okay. So we have some cover crops that is a problem with, but with our cereals, typically we don't seem to worry much about that. But that's a good point. Okay. Any other ideas? Okay, then what about crop alternatives? Is anything happening here in this area? Nothing! Oh man. Nothing happening. So, I think I was really intrigued when Dwayne Beck, he came from South Dakota to speak in Pennsylvania. And I was so intrigued by him because they have really they seem to have transformed that area of South Dakota by many more crops. They're growing a lot of different crops and profitably. It makes their system work better. They have now a lot of options. And the previous speaker also, he had flax, what else? Austrian pea, spring wheat, and I didn't know if they grow winter wheat over there. It might be too cold. Barley, malting barley, or he said forage barley didn't seem to be very profitable, but I think we need to give a harder thought at that. And I don't know I also think we need to look at more at perhaps some specialty markets, if we can capture. Now, I do hear some farmers are growing non-GMO soybeans here. That is because that is a specialty market. And I think can we bank on that and perhaps grow some different crops, because then we have more opportunities to also perhaps use cover crops. And crop diversity is really important. We've also heard about these challenges with some herbicide-resistant weeds. And crop diversity is, I think, a very important tool for us to avoid getting into a treadmill with pesticides. Any other ideas about... we had some movement with rye grown for, I guess for, what was it now again? Some liquor. Gin, or what is it? Bourbon. Yes. So, I mean, it's usually there are niche markets, but I think one reason why we're in the bind, perhaps where we're at, is we rely so heavily on commodities. And we have just gotten used very much to the commodity model. But perhaps we have to get out of that treadmill a bit and try to see, can we capture on some opportunities to do specialty crops. Livestock integration, is that happening? It's still also, do you guys see that as being anything promising or not? Grazing cover crops, or perhaps, no? Nothing? So, I don't know if it is, sometimes I'm seeing the soils here. And right now I saw all these puddles in the field, and it scares me a bit. If the animals can cause compaction, you know. So I don't know if it is anything worthwhile, but I also think these puddles might be a result of the poor soil quality and the poor soil health that you have. And if you, I don't know, did Jerry Grigar actually come from Michigan? He's here? Jerry here? Okay, well, okay, there he is. I visited with Jerry Grigar from Michigan this last year, and we looked at a lot of fields there, and terrible compaction and water standing in the fields. It was just a horror. But he's been doing long-term no-till on his own farm, and the difference is just very big, night and day. And the soil drains now much better, and you don't see those puddles much. Do you have a lot of puddles in your field now, Jerry? No. So I saw here lots of puddles in fields, and I think it is just a result of this poor soil health that you have. And so I find that with no tillage, that's one of the things we see, that livestock integration, because of the better drainage of the soil, it's also easier to have the animals in there without them causing damage to the soil. Well, that last question is really big, but can we bring people back to the rural areas? I think it's all based on what we have been discussing. I think we need to find opportunities for our young people to work in the rural areas and to find enterprises. I don't know if anybody, any ideas about that? That's perhaps too big of a question to tackle here, but I think I just wanted to put it out there because I've been thinking a lot about it lately. And well, then I think I'm just going to wrap it up here, guys.